In this video, I want to give you some quick tips about voicing the throat tones on the clarinet. This is sort of a follow-up to last week's video where I talked about resonance fingerings on the clarinet and how to find the best resonance fingerings for your instrument. So if you haven't watched that, be sure to check that out. That has lots of good advice for how to get these throat tones sounding better. But today I want to talk about what happens when you're playing a technical passage or something where you're not able to get your best resonance fingering down, either because the notes are too fast or it's too cumbersome with the notes that you're coming from or going to, or different situations that may come up like that. In this instance, you're going to be stuck just doing an uncovered, no resonance fingerings down, just your regular plain old open G or A or whatever the note may be. You don't have that opportunity to help yourself with the resonance fingerings, so you're going to have to help yourself as much as you can with the voicing alone and how you're playing the throat tone. And though this may never sound quite as good as a really good, well-voiced resonance fingering note, it will sound a whole lot better than a poorly voiced throat tone note for sure. So the first thing I want to talk about is just how big of a difference the voicing makes on these notes. On the clarinet, the voicing has a little bit less of an effect on notes where you have lots of fingers down. Sometimes those are called like long tube notes versus short tube notes where you don't have a lot of fingers down because it's a short amount of tube resonating versus a long amount of tube. That's why sometimes also we call this like the long B, because it's everything down and is the longest note of the instrument besides low E, which is pretty much equally as long. Now, the issue is with those longer tube notes, your voicing doesn't affect it as much as the shorter tube notes. So I'm going to play a low G and sort of move my voicing around so you can hear how that affects it. Then I'm going to play an open G and move my voicing around so you can hear how that affects that note. Now in both of those, I was moving the voicing and changing it about the same, but you heard way more of an effect on the open G than the low G. This is the same reason why the upper clarion notes, like high G up to high C, can be a little finicky to hit, because you can play like D or C with kind of not a great clarion voicing, but once you get up to here, it's much more finicky and the margin of error for where your voicing needs to be becomes smaller and smaller. And that's the same exact thing that happens with the throat tones. It's just a smaller margin of error for where the voicing has to be to get the best tone on those notes. For me personally, I find the best voicing for the throat tones, and really the upper clarion too, is just about as high as possible. So really aiming for a super fast, super narrow, really kind of airstream to get the good voicing, that nice high back of the tongue, really high pressure air on the throat tones to get them the best sounding that they can be. Now that does create the issue of making your throat tones even sharper, which they already kind of tend to be sharp. When they're voiced the best for the best sound, they just get sharper, and that's a real limitation of the clarinet and why we like resonance fingerings, to help bring it down but also have that good supported voicing. Now, something that we can do to sort of circumvent that is, I like to actually think of the throat tone notes as long tube notes. So what I mean by that is, yes, on B flat, for example, there's only like this much clarinet vibrating. What I want to think on that is getting that much clarinet vibrating as much as possibly, blowing with the kind of support I would use to get the whole instrument vibrating, and really just making sure that it's a really rich airstream going through. And that can help with the sharpness of it a little bit. So I'm thinking really high with my voicing, really fast and high pressure air, but maybe thinking almost like warm to the air or really energetic to the air to get like the most reed vibrations, the biggest reed vibrations and biggest clarinet vibrations as I can on just this tiny bit that's vibrating. Let me try to demonstrate the difference between that. I'll start with just it's a throat B flat, it's gonna sound bad, weak, wimpy air, and then I'm going to try to get it as resonant and and most of the instrument as possible resonating, even though it is still only this much of the instrument resonating, but I'm gonna make that much of the instrument resonate as much as I possibly can, and hopefully you can hear the difference between those two kinds of support on the throat tones. Hopefully you can hear that. It's a pretty small difference, but every little bit counts on these really not so great sounding notes. Another big benefit to really supporting and really trying to resonate as much of the instrument as possible on those throat tones is if you're going from like an A, like I just played, up to a B natural and crossing the break, then you're already going to be in the perfect air support in the perfect position to have that B come out perfectly natural. And that leads me to sort of the last issue that happens with voicing on these throat tones is either when you're going up, crossing the break from A to B, you under support the A and then the B doesn't come out, or coming back down as well, you often can get the same issue where your support's fine on the B and then you under support the A and it doesn't sound very good. And this often happens actually more when you're going down rather than going up, because as you're coming down, you're sort of thinking about aiming down, and aiming down is fine on the B. The B will sound good with that little bit more open, a little bit more relaxed voicing perhaps, but then the A will sound really bad, especially if you drop it even more as you're descending even more. It'll get really bad sounding, something like this. And you can see I'm even pivoting my head a little bit and thinking about, okay, I'm in the higher register, everything's great, now I'm going down to the lower register, so I'm gonna change things and drop my head and drop the voicing, and you can hear how bad that A sounds. And that was even actually with the resonance fingering. I was just doing that instinctually, and it sounded so gross. So we wanna make sure that actually when we're going down to the throat tones, and actually really whenever we're doing a big descending interval, that we're thinking up and supporting up on that throat tone note rather than just letting it sag down. All right, that's all I got for the voicing for the throat tones. I hope that helps. Be sure to check out last week's video about finding the resonance fingerings, because those are immensely helpful as well. And I actually want to thank the QuickStart Clarinet community, because somebody in the comments actually suggested that I talked about the throat tones. I think it's a perfect topic to talk about and really work on these throat tone notes because they're such a notorious issue of the clarinet, so I was happy to talk about that and make a couple videos about it. And of course, if you have any topics that you would like to know more about or hear my perspective on, be sure to leave those in the comments as well, and I will most likely make a video out of them because I always love hearing what you guys are struggling with and what you all want some help with and being able to provide that help. So thank you so much for watching this. Thank you so much for your support and for your comments on future topics, and I look forward to seeing you in another video.